My father died on a Tuesday, and by Thursday my stepmother had already changed the locks on his house. My name is Nadia. I was 31 years old, and I had spent the last 6 years of my father's life watching a woman named Carol slowly erase me from it, one holiday at a time, one phone call left unanswered at a time, one birthday she forgot to mention to him at a time. I want to be fair, because fairness is something my father raised me to value even when it cost me. Carol wasn't cruel in ways anyone could point to. She was cruel in ways that only the person losing something could see. The way she'd schedule family dinners on nights she knew I worked. The way she'd tell my father I seemed busy lately when I'd called and he simply hadn't picked up. The way she slowly became the only person who spoke for him. My father built a hardware supply business from nothing, 31 years of 6 a.m. mornings, of teaching me how to read a balance sheet at the kitchen table when I was 14, of telling me someday, Nadia, this is yours. I worked in that business for 8 years. Then Carol convinced him I'd be happier somewhere else, and within a year, I was managing inventory for a company that wasn't mine, watching someone else's name go on the loading dock sign where mine used to be considered. When he got sick, pancreatic cancer, diagnosed in March, gone by November, Carol controlled every visit. She sat in on every doctor's appointment. She was in the room when the lawyer came to update his will, and I was not invited, though I didn't know that until much later. I found out my father had died from a text message. Not from Carol. From his longtime business partner, Walt, who'd heard it from someone at the funeral home before anyone had bothered to call me. I drove 4 hours through the night to get to the house I grew up in. When I arrived at 7 a.m., Carol was standing in the driveway in a bathrobe, drinking coffee, watching a locksmith replace the front door hardware. Nadia. She said my name like she was mildly inconvenienced by my existing. I didn't think you'd come. He's my father. Was, she said, and something in the way she corrected me told me exactly how the next few months were going to go. I asked if I could go inside, just to sit in his study for a moment, just to be somewhere that smelled like him one more time. Carol told me the house was a lot right now, and maybe it would be better if I came back after the funeral, once things had settled. Things never settled. What I didn't know standing in that driveway was that Carol had already met with the family lawyer twice since my father's death, a lawyer I'd never heard of, not the one who'd handled our family's affairs for 20 years. My father's longtime attorney, a man named Harold Ferris, who'd known me since I was in diapers, had been quietly replaced 8 months earlier, right around the time Carol started attending every doctor's appointment alone with my father. The funeral was small, tasteful, entirely orchestrated by Carol. I sat in the second row. Carol sat in the front with her adult son from a previous marriage, a man named Trevor I'd met exactly 3 times in 6 years, each time at holiday gatherings where he'd talked exclusively to my father about investment opportunities. After the service, Carol's new lawyer, a sharp young man named Preston Cale, approached me with a manila folder. Ms. Reyes, I have some difficult news. Your father's estate plan was recently updated. I think it would be best if we scheduled a formal reading. Updated when? 8 months ago. 8 months ago was 3 weeks after my father's diagnosis. 3 weeks after Carol became the only person in every room with him. The reading was scheduled for the following Monday. I spent the weekend calling Harold Ferris, the lawyer who'd handled my father's affairs since before I was born, the man who used to give me butterscotch candy from a jar on his desk when I was 6 years old waiting for my father to finish signing paperwork. Nadia, Harold said when I finally reached him, his voice tight. I need to tell you something, and I need you to stay calm. Your father called me 4 months ago. Not Carol's lawyer, me. He wanted to change something back. He said Carol had pressured him into a will he didn't fully understand, and he wanted my help fixing it. My hands went cold around the phone. What happened? He had a stroke 3 days before our scheduled meeting. A minor one, the kind that doesn't kill you, but takes just enough of your sharpness that Carol's lawyer suddenly had all the leverage he needed to say your father reaffirmed the existing will afterward, competent and clear-headed. With witnesses Carol selected herself. So there's nothing we can do. Harold was quiet for a moment. There's one thing. Before the stroke, before he lost that sharpness, your father mailed me something. He said if anything happened to him before we could fix the will properly, I should give this to you, and only you, in person. What is it? A letter, Harold said. And a flash drive. He recorded something, Nadia. I haven't watched it. He said it was for your eyes only, and I intend to honor that, but I think whatever's on it might be the reason Carol changed the locks before your father's body was even cold. I met Harold at his office the next morning. His hands shook slightly as he handed me a small flash drive and a sealed envelope with my name written in my father's unmistakable handwriting. The same handwriting that used to sign my report cards. The same handwriting from 31 years of birthday cards. I opened the letter first. Nadia, if you're reading this, it means I ran out of time before I could fix what I let happen. I need you to know that none of what's coming was really me. I was scared, sick, and I trusted the wrong person with decisions I was too tired to make myself. Watch the video. Then go to the storage unit on Route 9, Unit 214. The code is your birthday, all 6 digits. What you find there is the truth Carol has been trying to keep buried. I love you. I'm sorry I let this happen. Fix it. Dad. I couldn't breathe for a moment. Harold set up his laptop, plugged in the drive, and stepped out of the room to give me privacy. My father appeared on screen, thinner than I remembered, sitting in what looked like a hospital room, speaking directly into the camera with the kind of clarity that told me this was recorded on a good day. One of his sharper days before the stroke took even that from him. Nadia, if you're watching this, then Carol did exactly what I was afraid she'd do. I want you to know the business, this house, everything I built, none of it was ever supposed to go anywhere but to you. Carol convinced me, slowly, over years, that you'd moved on, that you didn't want the burden, that keeping the peace meant keeping distance. I believed her because I was tired, and because grief for your mother made me vulnerable to anyone who made my life feel easier. That was my mistake, not yours. He coughed and continued. For months before this recording, I discovered something. Carol's son Trevor isn't just an occasional visitor asking about investment opportunities. He's been running a scheme through my own accounts for 2 years. Money moving out of the business under invoices for consulting work that never happened. I found the paperwork by accident, going through old files looking for your college graduation photos. Nearly $200,000, Nadia. Funneled out through fake vendor accounts, and Carol knew. Carol had to have known, because half the fake invoices were approved with her signature. My stomach turned. $200,000, stolen slowly, from a business my father spent 31 years building. I confronted her. She cried, told me it was a misunderstanding, told me Trevor was going through a hard time and she'd fix it quietly so it wouldn't affect us. I was foolish enough to believe her, because by then I was sick and tired and just wanted peace in whatever time I had left. But I made copies of everything before I confronted her. Every fake invoice, every altered bank statement, every email between Carol and Trevor discussing how to keep it hidden from me. It's all in storage unit 214 on Route 9. The code is your birthday. He looked directly into the camera then, and his voice cracked in a way I'd only heard once before, at my mother's funeral 15 years earlier. I called Harold to fix the will because I knew once I confronted her, she'd protect herself by controlling everything else, including what happens to you. I was right to be scared. If you're watching this without me having fixed things properly, it means she got to the will before I could stop her. Use what's in that storage unit. Don't let her win. You built half of that business with me even when she made you feel like you didn't belong there anymore. It's still yours. Fight for it. The recording ended. I sat in Harold's office for a long time, staring at a frozen frame of my father's face, before I trusted myself to speak. There's a storage unit, I told Harold when he came back in. Route 9. My father documented Trevor stealing from the business and Carol covering it up. Harold's expression shifted from sympathy to something sharper, more focused. The look of a lawyer who'd just found his opening. Nadia, if that documentation is real and it's dated before the will was changed, we're not just talking about a sympathetic story anymore. We're talking about fraud, potentially undue influence on a dying man, and grounds to challenge the entire estate. What do we do first? First, Harold said, already reaching for his phone, we go get what's in that unit before Carol realizes it exists. We drove to the storage facility that afternoon. Unit 214 was small, cluttered with old furniture I recognized from my childhood bedroom, boxes of Christmas decorations, and in the back corner, a locked filing cabinet my father had apparently moved there himself, alone. Sometime in those 4 months when he was fighting a disease and a decision at the same time. Inside were exactly the documents he described, fake invoices totaling $194,000, bank statements with Carol's handwritten notes in the margins, and a printed email chain between Carol and Trevor with a subject line that made my hands shake as I read it. Keep this from him a little longer. I photographed everything before we left, and Harold made 3 separate backup copies before the day was over. That evening, driving back to my hotel, my phone rang. It was Carol. The reading is tomorrow at 10, she said, her voice honeysmooth in the way it always was when she thought she'd already won. I do hope you'll be reasonable about all this, Nadia. Your father wanted peace in the family. I looked at the folder of evidence sitting on my passenger seat. I'll see you at 10, I said, and hung up before she could hear whatever was building in my voice. The will reading took place in a conference room at Preston Cale's office, all glass walls and expensive furniture that Carol's lawyer clearly wanted us to be impressed by. Carol arrived in black, appropriately somber, with Trevor seated beside her looking bored and checking his phone every few minutes. Harold sat beside me, a leather folder resting on the table in front of him that he hadn't opened yet. Preston began reading through the standard language, the revocation of prior wills, the appointment of Carol as executor, and then the part that made my chest tighten even though I'd already known it was coming. To my wife, Carol Reyes, I leave the entirety of the family home, all financial accounts held jointly or individually, and full ownership of Reyes Hardware Supply, including all business assets, inventory, and accounts receivable. He paused. To my daughter, Nadia Reyes, I leave the sum of $10,000 and my personal collection of tools from the original workshop, in recognition of time spent together. $10,000. After 8 years working in that business. After 31 years of being told someday, Nadia, this is yours. Carol's face was arranged into an expression of practiced sympathy, the kind meant for an audience. Trevor didn't even look up from his phone. I understand this is difficult, Preston said, but your father's wishes were quite clear, and the will was properly witnessed and notarized 8 months ago, after a period of what the attending physician documented as full mental competency. Full mental competency, I repeated. Documented by a doctor Carol selected. Witnessed by people Carol chose. Notarized by a lawyer Carol hired to replace the attorney my father used for 20 years. Preston's smile tightened slightly. Ms. Reyes, I understand emotions are high, but dash. I have something to add to the record, Harold said, finally opening his folder. He slid copies across the table. The fake invoices, the altered bank statements, the email with the subject line keep this from him a little longer. Carol's face changed the moment she saw the first page. Not shock, exactly. Something closer to recognition, the particular stillness of someone realizing a plan has just gone wrong. What is this? Preston asked, though his voice had lost some of its earlier confidence as he scanned the pages. Evidence, Harold said, that approximately $194,000 was systematically embezzled from Reyes Hardware Supply over a period of 2 years, through fake consulting invoices approved by Carol Reyes and executed by her son, Trevor. Evidence that my client's father discovered this 4 months before his death, confronted Mrs. Reyes about it, and called me directly to begin the process of amending his will. A process interrupted only by a stroke that occurred 3 days before our scheduled meeting. Trevor finally looked up from his phone. His face had gone pale. This is absurd, Carol said, her voice climbing half an octave. Those documents could be forged. This is clearly some kind of dash. They're dated and notarized copies from the original files, pulled from a storage unit your husband rented independently, using a code only his daughter would know, Harold said calmly. I'd also point out that the timeline is significant. Your husband called me to amend his will 4 months ago, the exact period during which, according to these bank records, the embezzlement was discovered and allegedly handled quietly by you. Preston had gone very quiet, flipping through the pages with the expression of a lawyer realizing his client had not told him the full story. I want to be very clear about what this means, Harold continued. If my client's father discovered fraud committed by Mrs. Reyes' own son, with Mrs. Reyes' knowledge and signature on the falsified documents, and if he then attempted to amend his estate plan before suffering a medical event that prevented him from completing that amendment, a will executed under those circumstances, particularly one that conveniently benefits the party accused of the fraud, is subject to challenge on grounds of undue influence and potentially fraud in the inducement. You have no proof I knew about any of this, Carol said, though her voice had lost its earlier smoothness entirely. I finally spoke. There's a video, Carol. My father recorded everything before he lost the ability to. He explained exactly what he found, exactly when he confronted you, and exactly what you told him to keep him quiet. He knew you'd try something like this. That's why he made sure I'd have proof. The room went silent. Trevor stood up abruptly. I need to step out. Sit down, Preston said sharply, and for the first time, I understood that Carol's own lawyer was beginning to realize just how much legal exposure he'd walked into by not vetting his client's story more carefully. Carol's composure finally cracked. He was sick, Nadia. He was confused. He didn't understand what he found. Trevor was just Dash. Trevor was stealing $200,000 from a business my father spent 31 years building, I said. And you helped him hide it from a dying man, and then you had that same dying man's will change to make sure none of it would ever come out. Harold closed his folder calmly. I'd suggest, Mrs. Reyes, that before this goes any further, you consider whether you'd prefer to resolve this through mediation, or whether you'd prefer we file formally, at which point this evidence becomes part of a public probate contest, and potentially gets forwarded to the district attorney's office for a fraud investigation into your son's activities. Carol looked at Trevor. Trevor looked at the floor. For the first time since I'd arrived in that driveway 6 days earlier, I watched Carol's carefully constructed control over everything my father had built start to genuinely, visibly collapse. The mediation happened 3 weeks later, in a smaller conference room, without the glass walls Carol's original lawyer had probably chosen to intimidate me. Preston Cale had clearly had several serious conversations with his client in the intervening weeks, because the woman who walked in that day looked nothing like the composed figure standing in the driveway with the locksmith 6 weeks earlier. Harold had done his homework thoroughly. The forensic accountant we'd hired confirmed the exact embezzlement figure, $194,312, moved through 11 fake vendor accounts over 2 years. Combined with my father's recorded testimony and the timeline showing his attempt to amend the will before his stroke, Harold's legal opinion was blunt. If this went to a full probate contest, Carol would very likely lose the house, the business, and possibly face a fraud referral alongside her son. Carol's mediator made the calculation quickly. Rather than fight and lose everything, including her freedom, Carol agreed to a settlement. The business, Reyes Hardware Supply, 31 years of my father's life, came to me in full, along with formal removal of Carol as executor. The family home was sold, with proceeds split according to a formula Harold negotiated that gave me 60%, reflecting both my father's original intentions and the embezzled funds that needed to be accounted for somehow, even partially. Trevor agreed to a restitution schedule to avoid criminal referral, though Harold made clear to me privately that we'd be watching closely to make sure he actually paid it. Carol didn't look at me once during the entire signing. I walked out of that office as the owner of the business my father built from nothing, the business he'd taught me to run at a kitchen table when I was 14 years old, the business Carol had spent 6 years trying to convince him, and me, that I no longer belonged in. 3 months later, once the business was fully mine and the loading dock sign had my name on it again, I finally went back to my father's workshop to sort through his tools. The $10,000 and the tool collection that had originally been my entire inheritance, back when I thought that was all he'd left me. In the bottom of his old toolbox, wrapped in a shop rag, I found one more envelope. Inside was a photograph of the two of us, taken when I was maybe 8 years old, sitting together on the loading dock eating sandwiches during his lunch break. On the back, in handwriting from years before his illness, long before Carol had ever entered our lives, he'd written a note that must have been sitting in that toolbox for over a decade, waiting. Nadia, someday when you're running this place without me, remember it was never really about the business. It was about you knowing you could build something and no one could ever convince you that you didn't belong in it. I love you, Dad. I sat on that same loading dock, in the same spot from the photograph, and I cried for the first time since the funeral, not for the will, not for the fight, not even for Carol's betrayal, but for a father who'd spent his entire life, right up to the very end, quietly making sure I'd be able to take back what was always meant to be mine. The business is still mine. Trevor's restitution payments come in monthly, smaller than they should be but consistent. I haven't spoken to Carol since the mediation, and I don't intend to. But every morning, when I unlock that loading dock door, I think about a man who is dying, losing his sharpness, running out of time, and who still found a way, from a hospital bed, to make sure his daughter got the truth. If you found out your stepmother schemed to steal your entire inheritance after your father's death, would you fight for it in court like Nadia did, or walk away for the sake of peace? Let us know in the comments. Would you have fought this hard or let it go?